This is the Cereal at Midnight podcast. Howdy and welcome to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland, and this week I'm talking to Antonia Carlotta. Now, this is a special episode for people that are into Universal movies, Universal monsters, Universal horror, heck, just movie history in general, because in addition to being an on-screen performer, an actor, a writer, a YouTuber, she's the host of the Universally Me YouTube channel. Antonia is also the niece of Carl Laemmle. Now, you probably know that the Laemmles in Hollywood, they changed the face of Hollywood. Carl Laemmle was the co-founder and until 1934, I believe, the owner of Universal. Universal doesn't exist without Carl Laemmle, and the legacy of the Laemmles all the way through now, the Laemmles still are so important to the preservation, the curation, even just the very existence of movies as we know them. But what I love about this conversation is that it's not just rooted in the past. Now, Antonia's YouTube channel is a wonderful resource for movie history because she's talking about the monsters, she's talking about the actors and the actresses. She's got an interview on her channel with Carl Laemmle. Guys, this is amazing stuff. But it also, this conversation also talks about what's happening with Universal right now. We talk about the good, we talk about what's working, we also talk about maybe some things that aren't necessarily working and could be improved upon just a little bit. So it's an interesting perspective. It goes to a lot of interesting places too. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this one. And I'm super grateful to Antonia. So without further ado, Antonia Carlotta. First of all, you seem really connected to classic film. Were you, like, is that just in your blood or is this something you came to?
I think it's mostly something that I came to. I didn't necessarily grow up understanding my connection to, Hollywood or any of that. When I was a kid, I lived in Connecticut until I was about 13. There's not, there wasn't a whole lot of movie stuff around me then. I think my biggest connection as a kid, my mom had essentially like a giant gallery wall going up our staircase with like 100 pictures that were from my family on old movie sets and old newspaper clippings and, movie posters, things like that I would, sort of meander and look at from time to time going up and down the stairs. But I don't think I had any context to understand that was my family on real movies or big movies or interesting movies or anything like that. It was just like, oh yeah, those are my mom's pictures of my family. They did movies. That was about it. And I'm positive that there are, old classic movies I watched as a kid and enjoyed, but nothing where it's like, I wasn't the classic movie kid at school or anything like that.
Well, let me ask you this: were movies a part of your life at all? Like, were you part of the movie culture? Did you love movies, like Breakfast Club, or
I always watched movies. I always loved movies very much. I did host movie nights at my house. And even actually as a kid, maybe when I was about 11, 12, 13, I started hosting scary movie nights at my house. That was a thing that I did. So I would watch It and what is it? The House on Haunted Hill, all of those movies. I'd invite my friends over. We'd do scary movie night. I remember we watched, which now I realize how inappropriate it was. Like at the end, we'd always find a comedy to watch, which was like Rocky Horror Picture Show or Scary Movie once that came out, and Scary Movie 2. So I was that kid, but I also watched, and I still continue to watch, like a lot of garbage movies. I was obsessed with the Mary-Kate and Ashley series of movies, Passport to Paris and Billboard Dad. And it's not like I had some minimum quality meter that I was hitting in my movies. I just kind of always had the TV on and I always had, movies on and stuff.
So was there like a moment where you're like, wait a minute, this heritage is like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So once I moved to California, so I'm about 13 at this point, I think it just started to contextualize it for me. I went to Universal Studios and was like, oh, this is the studio that, my family started. And I would see screenings of the movies that they made and things where people actually cared about those in a different sense.
Mhm.
And it just started to help me understand how big and real and important like the things that my family had done. And then that's when I started to get more into it all. Like I learned that Carl Laemmle won a Supreme Court case against Thomas Edison, that he started Universal, that he saved hundreds of families from Europe as Hitler was coming to power, that he had a star on the Walk of Fame, right? All of these things I started to learn about. And then when I would tell my friends, like they had never heard any of those things. They had never heard of Carl Laemmle. I hadn't totally heard of Carl Laemmle other than as, a vague family name of mine. But once I started to learn all of these things, like question why I hadn't known them, question why other people didn't know them. Then suddenly I was like in it. Then I was like, wait, I want to learn more. I want to talk about these things. I want to share these stories, right? I don't want them to just disappear forever. So I think that's what did it. But it took time,
It takes maturity and age, I think, before some of us can really. I mean, I'm jealous of some of these people that I know who seem to have always been
Yeah.
exposed to classic film. Was there a was there a gateway movie, or was like what did you gravitate towards? Because I know you do a lot with the monster. You talk a lot about the Universal monsters and things like those are great gateways. But what about for you?
Yeah, the monsters, I would say, were a part of the gateway for me. And especially because then I had my Aunt Carla who was in those movies. So I could watch a
Yeah,
movie and then ask her about it and hear
it's
her
amazing.
experience. And so, more than even a specific movie, maybe Carla was my gateway to a lot of these things. Um, I loved movies. Like I remember seeing My Man Godfrey. I think we watched that in an old film class of mine, and I loved it so much. And that made me then want to watch more movies like that. And yeah, it's hard to pick just one. It was such a snowball for me. It was
Mhm.
like watching this movie and being like, oh, that's interesting. And then watching that one and then finding some link like, oh, this actor that I like from this movie is in this one. And oh, they're in this too. So why don't I watch that? And then learning some, I don't know, fun fact about that relates to, right? Like
Mhm.
it weaves and it turns. And there's still like for all the movies that I've seen, for all the things that I know, there's way more that I still don't know. And I'm comfortable now. It took me a while to get there, but like I'm really comfortable saying that. Like there are people who grew up knowing these movies and loving these movies, and they've been like just a part of their DNA in some way their whole life. I'm still learning all the
Yeah.
time.
It's a beautiful thing though to know that. And I think with that realization, there's like for me it's a joy because I think about, oh, there's so much more discovery that I still have ahead of me, you know?
Absolutely.
What at the same time that you're having this realization, I mean, you're working in Hollywood, right? Like I know you're on screen, you're performing. Are the two connected for you? Like how were they evolving at the same time?
I grew up doing theater. I always loved performing and acting. I guess that's one thing where I can sort of say like, oh, that was in my blood. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was always very drawn to that. Um, and so for me, there was just something about, I don't know how to word it, like starting Universally Me, starting my YouTube channel where I share all of these things. It was a way for me to merge like two passions of mine, right? I was so interested in learning and sharing this information. I was so interested in performing and having an audience and getting that opportunity to meet new people and talk to people and all of that. And Universally Me was a way to combine those.
What's the reaction been to the YouTube channel?
Mostly really positive, which is
Yeah.
wonderful for me. It's great. I love hearing all the time how meaningful the movies and my family legacy and that history of Universal. I love hearing how important it is for people and how much it's meant to them in their lives, whether the movies helped them find community or feel comfortable with a part of themselves that they weren't. That's really wonderful. And as I think you mentioned before, a lot of this history is kind of dying out. It gets erased, it gets forgotten, it gets lost. And so knowing that I'm a part of keeping it alive for people, or even sometimes helping people just discover something they've never heard of before
Mhm.
is just really meaningful for me.
Have you heard, I don't have to leave this in, but I have to ask this. Have you heard from anyone at Universal who has seen your channel?
A little bit here and there.
Yeah.
I used to know the Universal archivist, and he has since left Universal. I still talk to him from time to time. And I know he's watched some of my videos. I've been to events at Universal where somebody might come up to me and say, "Oh, I've seen your channel," or "I think this is so cool." I do love that at Universal there seem to be a lot of people who are passionate about
Mhm.
Universal at Universal.
Yeah.
So that's really nice. A friend of mine used to work for kind of the guest experiences at Universal, and he included me in a training video for the Universal tour guides. So I got to share with them the history of Carl Laemmle. I did a Q&A once at Universal for the employees. So yes, some people at Universal have seen my videos, and then that's a way that I've gotten to connect with them.
It just seems like there's such a great opportunity there to work at a higher level where they could tap you as a family member and as somebody. You don't have to comment on this if you don't want to, but I mean, it's a natural built-in opportunity. There are so many studios that don't seem connected to their legacy, and I won't name them, but people know. We're watching every day, like we're seeing, art being written off as a tax write-off or a tax write-down
Yes.
or something like that. And Universal seems really connected to the legacy of their studio and to the films themselves. I can't think of any other studio that's getting so many films restored and back into circulation. Again, I'm coming from a physical media point. Like every month there's at least 10 Universal movies that are being presented on Blu-ray or something like that they've just been in the vault, right? So I love Universal for that, and hopefully maybe somebody will see this and they'll be like, let's bring her into the fold. Because I mean, this could be like a show with what's going on with Turner Classic Movies right now. Like I'm so worried about the torch passing. That's the thing, is like the
Mhm.
torch needs to be passed to other people to continue to celebrate movie history, and you're already doing it.
Totally. Yeah. And, I would say Universal hasn't always been perfect about this. After the Laemmle era, there were a few owners of Universal that specifically tried to erase the history and say, we're a new Universal. We have nothing to do with the old one. I think it was, when Ron Meyer came on, that he really wanted to honor, and he started connecting more to the history again, which I'm really grateful for. A studio that I'm so, I guess, that I admire so much and how they connect to their history is Disney. And I feel like Universal could learn something from them. I think the way that people know Walt Disney and connect to him and connect to the history, the way that they weave it into their park at all levels, I think that that's something that Universal could do, and they're starting to do a little bit
Mhm.
more. There's no reason really, other than, that they're kind of starting from scratch now, that Carl Laemmle couldn't be, kind of the face of Universal again, and that they couldn't create this, I don't know how to word it, right? Like lovable, heroic, admirable person
Yeah.
that people went to Universal to connect to and felt like they were a part of that family, the way that people feel like they're a part of the Disney family. So I hope that at some point Universal is able to take some notes from them in how they're rebuilding and re-releasing their movies and expanding their parks. I think there's a lot of room there for them to grow. And going back to when you said, potentially working at Universal in a higher capacity one day, like I will just put that out in the universe. I would love to do that. I think my work is to figure out, where do I want to be, in that structure, and how could I best contribute to making like the better Universal of tomorrow. But I think in everything that I'm doing now, I'm just trying to lay the foundation so that one day I say, aha, here's where I fit, here's what I'll do, and then I'll be there. So
I love that.
I'll keep
That's
you
great.
posted.
You have to manifest it. You do. I really believe in manifestation. Like you put it out there and then you take the steps towards getting there. And you can't take any steps if you don't set the goal in the first place. So
Totally.
do
And
you go ahead?
I was just going to say, Carl Laemmle always used to talk about his Laemmle luck. That was a way that he promoted a lot of his stuff. One of my favorite quotes is like, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So I just feel like right now I'm doing all the preparation and eventually the opportunity will get there and I'll get lucky.
What would you want to do? Do you like the on-camera thing? Do you like hosting and the editing and all that?
I do. I love being on camera. If the opportunity that came my way was, acting or doing something on screen, like I would eat it up in a second. But I'm also a very structured and logical and analytical person. It's funny, I don't always consider myself a creative person, though I'm in this creative field. I approach everything from such a research point of view, from such an analytical point of view. So I could see a future where I am producing, where I'm helping to create the slate of films for Universal, where I'm talking about ways, gosh, I would love to be like in the dark universe and say, hey, here's a way that we could revamp these movies where you will attract these audiences, if you use these actors. Like I would love to be able to build something out like that. But I'm not so in the industry or so ingrained in the industry that I know exactly what that role is or that place is that I need to be.
That's a good point, though, because I do feel like there's often a disconnect between the executive level who are greenlighting projects and then the actual creation process, knowing what would be the best fit for the audience and for the studio's resources. Well, how many times have they tried to do like a new franchise out of like a new connected universe? Like there was the Tom Cruise Mummy movie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there was. Do you remember the Van Helsing? Might have been before you were into it, but when Van Helsing was a movie, it was like it's the future of Universal monsters, but it wasn't.
No. And one of my friends really enjoys that movie. Maybe about 2 years ago, I tried giving it a watch. It wasn't personally my favorite.
Yeah.
I think that Universal keeps trying to make their classic horror movies into action movies. I think they're trying to capture the Marvel audience or that DC audience, and they're not carving out their own space.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're not getting the audience that they want. They keep making these action movies that aren't really horror. Like Renfield was visually interesting, but I didn't love the story and the mob and, all of that stuff that went into it. It didn't do great at the box office, and I don't think it's going to be like memorable for a long time in people's minds. I think that Universal could have made it a true horror or like suspense film, and it might have made a movie that was much more meaningful and profitable. That's what they're missing out on profit, I think, by not just being their own entity. I think back to, and I know this was like right before COVID, but The Invisible Man that came out, which was a proper horror film. And I think it was updated in a really like unique way or a really good way. And that movie did great, low budget, high returns. Like, I'm not sure why it didn't spark Universal to say, let's lean into that.
There's a magic to Universal that nothing else can be what Universal was in those early days. Those movies are iconic for a reason. Even going through the 50s with like the Black Lagoon, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and those movies are iconic and they're beloved. And I feel like there's still a place for that at the modern movie marketplace. So we've just got to let them know, I guess. And that's what you're talking about is connecting,
Yeah. And figuring out how to let them know. I mean, I have two step kids here. They're 3 and they're 7, and they love the old monster movies. They'll ask all the time, like, I want Wolfman. I want Wolfman. Play Gilman. Like they'll ask for these movies and they'll watch like most of the way through, at their young age with not great attention spans, and they ask over and over for them. So it's not like these movies are so old that they can't be enjoyed by kids or new audiences or something like that. We just have to find the way to, it's like you just have to find the way to reach that audience. And that's one of the things that Universal's not putting effort into.
Yeah. How do you feel? This might be a tough question, but how do you feel from where you sit and what you see? How do you feel classic movies are surviving? Are they surviving in our culture? Or when we started this conversation, I said I feel like a lot of them are being forgotten. I feel like the connection grows thinner by the year. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different perspective?
I think I do agree with that. I just think as it stands right now, each year we lose a few more classic movie fans than we pick up. And, I recognize that those classic movie fans, well, those movies were brand new modern movies when they were young. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, I don't know if we're quite scooping people up the same. I think each time you have a good modern remake of a movie, you direct more people to the original. If we made a really great Renfield, if we made a really great Frankenstein remake, for instance, I think that so many more people who are likely to say, but what started this all? Where did this come from? And you can grow, a new classic film fan base. But as it stands right now, I think we're kind of losing that audience a little bit.
The biggest problem that I see, and I'm interested how you feel about this, is that I feel like the audiences that I see now think that the older movies are corny or they're cheesy. They're not willing to suspend their disbelief. Now, like Renfield, we'll watch Matrix stunts and, like all the crazy stuff that movie, like gets beaten with his own limb, right? But then the idea of a Bela Lugosi Dracula or Frankenstein, I feel like there's a lack of suspension of disbelief. And I wonder if sometimes if the modern movies have been so, I don't know, this might be my age, because I just feel like there's a smugness now, and I feel like we do not allow ourselves to enjoy things. Like people, my channel, sometimes people are like, I don't watch black and white movies or something. Like, that's horrifying to me, because I'm like, I talk about a ton of them. What are you talking about? But I don't know. It's just there's a disconnect there, and I'm like, when did we become too cool for this?
Yeah, I can understand that for a young audience, those old movies, in addition to, say, the special effects or, whatever, not being as realistic as today, for instance, those movies probably seem a lot slower because our modern day horror movies, you have a new frame, right? Every single, like this angle, close in, back away, all of that. The old movies, a lot of times they'll set up a camera, they'll run a scene, they'll set, and so it probably feels really different. You can't just swipe, you can't move. And that probably makes it a little harder for a younger person to invest in a new film. They're also not going to stumble upon those movies the way that people more often might have 20 years ago. They're not flipping channels. They're not stuck with whatever happens to be on TV. They've opened up their streaming service. They've got 10 movies recommended for them that are exactly like the last 10 movies that they watched. So they're probably not going to say, what's this old movie that's totally different than anything I've ever seen?
Yeah. What's our responsibility? How can we help?
I think, some of these things that you and I are doing right now.
We have YouTube channels. That's what we're doing. But yeah.
So, we can try to talk to everybody that we know and find the connection that might make somebody interested. You told me you love horror movies. You should watch this movie from the 30s. It's not like other horror movies because XYZ. And I think, and it inspired this movie that inspired the movie you love. Something like that. Or, even if somebody's talking, like I will try to find ways if somebody's talking about a social issue to connect it to an old movie from the 30s where already they were talking about this thing, or it gives a really different perspective or whatever it is. So sometimes I'll just try to find the connection that I can. I have my YouTube channel where I'm just continuing to talk about different movies, actors, topics, things, and hoping with each one I'll reach a few new people and somebody will say, oh, wow, I learned something I didn't know before. And now I'm interested in watching this movie or seeing all the movies of this actor or whatever it is. And I think your podcast, I love, and channel, I love that there are like conventions, that go on, and panels and Q&As. I think it's just all of these things to keep trying to reach out to people. If everybody just takes one friend to a screening, they're not all going to love that screening, but I bet a lot of them will, and then they'll be interested in learning more. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, in LA, like preservation and conservation, those are so important to me. I used to be really big about preserving and conserving, every old building in LA and all of that stuff, which I still believe in wholeheartedly. But I also understand that part of moving forward is letting go of things from the past. And sometimes you have to make room for new things. So it's just about what can we do to preserve or remember or share as much as possible. So even if the building's not there anymore, even if we lost the film or the actors passed away, we've done as much as we can to share as much as we can for the next generation who won't get to see it live or in person.
What I love about essentially what you're saying is like active fandom. Fandom is active. It's not passive.
Yes.
Like take charge of it, be involved in it, share it, spread it. And yeah, that's what we can do, because we're doing that, but everybody can do that. And it's even if it's just talking to somebody at the checkout at the grocery store, if you're wearing like a Bride of Frankenstein shirt or something, like, oh, it's a great movie, that's something that encourages, that elevates everything.
Absolutely. I don't want to be the only old Universal YouTube channel or the only Carl Laemmle channel, right? I will feel so validated if 5 more pop up who are doing the same thing that I am, because that's whole new audiences that are going to hear, the information, whole new people that are going to connect to it. So I'll feel like I've done my job if more people out there know Carl Laemmle and love Carl Laemmle and share Carl Laemmle. Active. I love that term, active fandom.
Let's put it on shirts, the marketing.
Yes.
As we are, I'm winding down, but I do want to ask you, because you're talking about classic film, you're talking about social issues connected with the history of cinema. And I love that too, because these very few issues are actually new. You can go back to the pre-code era, and so much of what we're dealing with now was a topic of conversation 100 years ago. Have you experienced any, the first word that comes to mind would be gatekeeping, but just any adversity, any pushback about what your message is, or just you yourself?
Yes. Yeah. I've definitely experienced gatekeeping. I don't want to say, oh, I've had all of these negative experiences. I feel like a lot of people very much want me to prove, that I'm an expert, prove that I deserve to be talking about these things. I absolutely don't mind, people correcting me on my channel. Oh, this is pronounced like this. Oh, you said the wrong date. It was actually this. Like, that's totally fine. I get a lot of comments where it's like, you should know this if you're making these videos, Missy, or things like that, where it feels not a productive conversation. And I have made videos where I'll talk about the political, connection of a movie, back in 2016 when was it really 2016? I guess it was back in 2016 when Trump was elected. I made a video about Carl Laemmle's activism, how I thought he would feel about, the election of Donald Trump. It mirrored a lot of things that were going on in the 1930s. And I cited everything very specifically. And I got some angry comments from people saying, stick to the movie, stay out of politics, saying you don't know anything about what your uncle thought, even though I said, oh, he was a part of this, anti-Nazi group, and here are similar groups today. And he was a part of, he signed this paper or wrote this letter that said all of these thoughts, and people saying, no, that's not true, stay out of this. So a lot of adversarial comments, I guess, in the fight. I had people try to like gotcha me as well by saying that he was a registered Republican, which I then in detail talked about how, you know, Republican and Democrat has changed a lot in meaning over the years. Here's what it meant before. Here's what it means now. Here, policy stances are the same or different. And people who then would say, you know, oh, shut up, I don't actually care, or you don't need to educate me. Things like that. So all of this to say, yes, I've experienced some gatekeeping. I've experienced some just maybe like general anger. There was a time when those kinds of things, I think, actually did hurt and maybe kept my channel down a little bit. I would feel like I had to back up anything that I said so much, provide so much supporting evidence for, you know, this statement or that statement, or, well, maybe I just shouldn't talk about this at all because these people might comment this thing. And I think then there was a point where I almost just got tired of it. It probably was around the time that I made my video that said, you can call the monster Frankenstein. And I, you know, made a like 8-point argument as to why, talking about, you know, Mary Shelley's point of view and the original book and how definitions, I went into great detail. And so many people just kind of said like, no, I disagree, or like, no, I don't like this, or said things that I said in the video, but like clearly hadn't watched the video. And that, I think, might have been the turning point where it was like, no matter what I say, some people are just going to disagree or be against me or try to find something, and like, that's okay, that's on them. All engagement is good engagement, all views are good views, and whatever. And I think that opened up a lot of freedom for me. Then I was like, I'm just gonna make what I'm gonna make. Like, I'm gonna do my best work, I'm gonna talk about it as accurately and correctly as I can, and then just let go and let God.
That's a good philosophy, because everybody says, no, you can't. Very few people say, yes, you can. Just go ahead and do it. Like, but you do learn, like you learned it. I think I'm learning it too, is that it doesn't matter. None of that doesn't matter. Just keep moving forward with saying what you have to say. It'll find the people that it's meant to find. And it doesn't matter what people think. I mean, it feels like it does matter, but they can't stop you, you know. And every comment they leave, to your point, every comment they leave, every time they click the video, they're promoting that video. That video gets further into the algorithm or whatever it is.
Absolutely. You know, and I recognize that there are people for whom the monsters, the Laemmles, they're part of their DNA and they've loved them their whole life. And for so many of those people, they're fantastic, right? They're watching my videos, they're engaged. They want to have conversations and ask questions and talk more and teach me things in a really wonderful way. And I'm so grateful for that. Like, I want to learn everything I can from everybody else who's been thinking about this their whole life. So yeah, I guess all of that's to say, like, for those people, like, I'm so grateful. And on the other side, people who are, I don't know, mean, like, they just don't have to matter.
Yeah, that's well. So that's good advice for anybody that's watching this that may be feeling discouraged or bullied or anything. It's like, just it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Just keep going ahead.
For sure, there are so many more people who love what you do than who don't.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's true.
That one comment sometimes can drown out the 20 positive ones, and just like, don't let it.
Yeah. What's coming up? What have you, like, what lies ahead for you? Is there anything you can tell us? You working on anything? Plans?
You know, you know what? Yes. So some things I have coming up. I mean, first off, more Universally Me episodes. I am putting the final touches on a video I'm editing right now, which is a really great story from when Carl Laemmle Jr. was a child on the Universal Studios lot. So that should be up this week. I have written some other scripts, a tour of Boris Karloff's homes all over LA. Carl Laemmle Jr.'s house in Beverly Hills was recently on the market, so doing a little home tour of that. So on Universally Me, all of that is coming up. Um, in the further future, I'm working on both a biography of Carl Laemmle, which there hasn't been one since the 1930s. So I'm really excited to do an update to that. That will probably be out a little over a year from now. And I am working on a children's book inspired by my Aunt Carla, who grew up living on the Universal Studios backlot as a kid. She had this incredible, magical fairy tale childhood. And then she acted in Dracula and she danced in Phantom of the Opera. So figuring out the timeline, but I think winter, spring of 2024, that should be out. And I recently acted in the web series revival of Strange Days at Blake Halsey High. It's called Echoes. And I don't have any more episodes coming out right now, but they just wrapped the season. So like, who knows what's up for next season?
Okay, I have to ask you, as someone who's acting on screen, do you worry now with these tax write-downs? Is there a part of you that's concerned like this might just go away? Or is that just kind of acknowledged to begin with, that nothing is permanent?
Yeah, yes and no. I haven't usually thought about it in like reference to my own work because nothing that I've done is so big budget that I think it's worth the write-off. I From a personal point of view, like I'm just so happy to be involved in any project that I can be involved in. It's so much fun for me. Would I love if the whole world gets to see it? Like, yeah, 1,000%. If they don't, I'll just try to take the lesson from it or the experience and move forward. But I think it's a terrible precedent that the studios are setting by doing this, by saying, we're going to make these projects, we're going to call them a failure, we're going to take the money. That I think is a problem. But from a personal point of view, I would try not to take it too personally.
Okay, that's a good answer. Good answer. As we wind down, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover?
That's a great question. No, I think just in a general sense, and obviously I'm kind of biased, but the more that I learn about all the members of my Laemmle family, so from Carl Laemmle Sr. to Carl Laemmle Jr. to Carla Laemmle, to my great-grandfather Eddie, who was a director at Universal, who traveled all around the world making movies. Just the more that I learn about them, the more that I learn that they were like great, brilliant, kind, interesting, fascinating, amazing people. And I would just love everybody to like crave to learn more about them and share more about them. And I don't know, poke at Universal sometimes to bring them more to the forefront of the studio.
Great. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to put all your social media links and your YouTube channel and everything in the description of this video. I would encourage everybody to click through those, follow you, Instagram, I know, Twitter, are you Facebook? I can't remember if you're on Facebook or not.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's technically my personal page, but everybody comes and follows it and I post there all the time. So pretty much everything is just Antonia Carlotta. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I don't really go on Clubhouse anymore, but I've got it. YouTube. I mean, those are all the places.
Wow. Yeah. It's a lot of places.
It's a lot of places. I'm trying to be more focused, but.
Thank you so much for the time that you spent with me here today. And thank you for keeping the spirit of classic cinema alive and fresh and relevant. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a joy.
There's so much in this conversation that I love. I specifically love the sort of call to action, which is that movie fandom is not a passive sort of a thing. It's instead of keeping others out, it's becoming a recurring theme here for Serial at Midnight. Instead of putting up borders, gates to keep people out. Can you name 5 Universal? Do you know Henry Hull? Are you familiar with the Cheney family? We could be inviting others into it. We could be sharing it and being a gateway for people that don't already love classic movies to discover them and to find them for themselves. I had a gateway. I want to thank my friend J Bones, because he was such a gateway for me for Universal movies. I've told him this before. He knows this, but I was aware of the Universal monsters, but his love for the Universal monster classics really was is infectious, and I watched them through a new lens because of how he saw them. And I think we can do that for other people. That's something that is we're all able to do it, right? It's not something, you don't have to have a YouTube channel. Just the people in your life, the people that you engage with. Just be a good influence. Just be a good movie fan, sharing it with other people. That's one of the things that I love about this conversation. Remember, you can follow Antonia at all the links. I'm going to include them at the video description. On the YouTube version, it's the video description. On the podcast version, it's the episode description. The links go everywhere. So please do support her, follow her. And I would love to know what you think about this episode. So you can contact Cereal at Midnight. You can leave comments on YouTube. You can give us thumbs ups. Please rate, review, subscribe. As I say all the time, there are 117 billion podcasts, and there are 135 new ones that launch each day. It's easy to get lost. And I think Cereal, like, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I feel like the audio version of this podcast, maybe even the video version too, it's just not getting seen by the people that I think would really enjoy it. It's kind of a secret. So, hey, speaking of call to action, spread the word. If it's just posting about it on your social media, if it's, wherever you go, if you know somebody is like, hey, you should check out Cereal at Midnight. I think you'd really enjoy them. Whatever you can do, I do sincerely appreciate you. I bow. I doff my cap to thee. What I'm getting Shakespearean now. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate you. We'll be back here soon with another exciting, relevant, powerful conversation. Take care. Until next time, I will catch you later.